Hello everybody, this is Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and we're back with another of our 5-Minute Histories videos. And today I'm standing next to the statue of the Marquis de Lafayette here in the middle of Mount Vernon Place. It was erected in 1924 on the 100th anniversary, not of the Revolution, of course, but on a victory celebration that the Marquis did here in the young America that he helped create in 1824. Back then, town after town, city after city gave him a hero's welcome for all he did for us. And today, in 2024, there is a great group of people that, like back then, are helping us remember Lafayette and all that he did. I'm pleased I'm going to be joined in a moment by Dr. Patti Maclay, who's with that group and is going to tell us all about Lafayette. She looks like she stepped out of Baltimore in 1824, but we'll get to that in a second. Before I turn it over to her, though, let me say a word about Lafayette. In 1777, a year after the shot heard round the world launched us on a path towards revolution, a young man named Gilbert Mortier arrived from France. He, of course, was the Marquis de Lafayette. He was convinced that the rebelling British colonists had a great idea in establishing a democracy, and he wanted to be part of it. And he was a part of it, of course. He was a senior general in Washington's army, a lifelong friend of Washington. Let's fast forward to 1781. That's when Washington decides to send Lafayette south to Virginia to try to contain the traitor Benedict Arnold, who was leading British forces rampaging through town after town in Virginia. As part of that, Washington was convinced that he would send a larger force to meet the British head-on in a decisive battle, and that, of course, was the Battle of Yorktown that led to America's victory in the Revolution. But before that, Lafayette was heading southward. He entered Maryland at Elkton and then went by ship to a town called Susquehanna Lower Ferry. He loved that little town. He thought it was beautiful. It reminded him of a town in France called Havre. And the good folks of Susquehanna Lower Ferry thought that had a ring to it. They changed the name to Havre de Grace, or Port of Grace. That's how it got its name. As Lafayette was traveling town to town, he was making quite the scene. One woman in Annapolis, a British sympathizing Tory no less, commented, she said, "I like the French better every hour. The divine Marquis de Lafayette is in town and is quite the thing." When Lafayette gets to Baltimore, he camps out with 1,200 men on Cathedral Hill, where the Basilica is today. He is hosted by a gentleman named David Poe and his wife Elizabeth. Elizabeth, during that dinner party, looks at Lafayette and says he seemed sad. He asked him why. And he said, "Well, I can't have a good time in here when my men are hungry and in tattered uniforms." The next day, Elizabeth engages a small army of seamstresses and sews 500 new uniforms for the French army, while her husband David rounds up $500 out of his pocket to provide beef and pork and bread to them. Those acts of kindness are things that Lafayette remembers his entire life. I'm going to wrap up by saying Lafayette returned to Baltimore in 1784 on his way home to France after the Revolution. The Maryland General Assembly made him a citizen of Maryland, so among many other things, Lafayette is a Marylander. And then, of course, he returns back in 1824 for this year-long victory celebration. But I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Dr. Maclay. We are all yours.
Hi, I am Patti Maclay. I am actually the National Vice Chair for the American Friends of Lafayette's committee that is reenacting the entire tour that Lafayette had in 1824 through 1825. And why did Lafayette come back to America at that time? Well, our country, as we are right now, was in the throes of a horrifically competitive presidential election. And because of that, patriotism in the United States just went down. So President James Monroe then decided, along with Congress, to invite the last surviving Major General of the American Revolution. And that was the Marquis de Lafayette. Lafayette himself was very interested in returning to America because he wanted to visit his friends, he wanted to see the country of his youth, but he had another reason. And that reason was because France at that time was being led by Charles X, an undemocratic monarch who would not allow the principles of democracy to exist in France. Because of that, Lafayette decided if he went back to America, he might be able to bring back to France examples of the fruits of democracy. Well, when Lafayette arrived in August of 1824, he was met with huge crowds in New York City. He then went into the northeastern states and then wound his way back, heading to Washington City, and ended up here in Baltimore on October 7th through the 9th. And he first arrived at Fort McHenry at the Star Fort, where they welcomed him with fife and drum and huge crowds and bands. He was brought into the fort, where he saw the tent of George Washington, which brought forward within him huge emotions, because it was within that very tent that he and George Washington forged the relationship that most documented and felt to be like that of father and son. Within the tent was John Eager Howard, the hero of the Battle of Cowpens in the American Revolution; Charles Carroll, who was the only Catholic signer of the Declaration of Independence; and Paul Bontelou, who was a French officer who served with Casimir Polinsky and also was a close friend of Lafayette. John Quincy Adams said, "Many a tear fell in that tent as they all hugged each other and remember and revive the memories of the American Revolution." Then, from the tent, he moved into Baltimore City itself, where huge crowds greeted him. He was given an honorary degree from the University of Maryland at Davidge Hall. He then went on to see the statue, the monument we see right here, which was not quite finished, to George Washington. He was feted at dinners and balls, and the Freemasons and the Sons of Cincinnati all greeted him while he was here. The American Friends of Lafayette decided that we would try to recreate the entirety of Lafayette's farewell tour. As Lafayette did, he thought we'd only be here for about 3 months, but the invitations that he received were so multiple that he ended up spending 13 months and traveled 6,000 miles and able to visit all of the then existing 24 states. The American Friends of Lafayette thought we would do 2 or 3 months of those same events, and we ended up doing the entire tour, which kicked off in August of this year, and that tour will continue into 2025, ending in Washington City, or Washington, D.C. today, in September of 2025. Now, on this tour, our whole desire is to bring forward the story of Lafayette in America, as well as in particular talk about his legacy. From a young age, he was an abolitionist. He believed in religious freedom. He fought for Native American rights even when we went back to France, and he was a proponent of women's equality. We will be recreating at the Star Fort at Fort McHenry the event where he is coming into the tent and meets that militia. That militia will be our own Maryland National Guard. The next day, on October 8th, we will come to this very site. And here we will have huge flags of America and France and have wreath laying and a commemorative event. And it will be 200 years ago to the day, on October 8th, that Lafayette was here at this place, and 100 years ago to the day when that statue of Lafayette was unveiled. Our final day of events will be at the Peel Museum. We will recreate a free concert in the afternoon of music from 1824, and that evening we will have a cocktail party featuring that music and the toasts that were given to Lafayette back in 1824. If you would like to get more information about these events, please go to Lafayette200.org, click on events, and you will see an entire calendar of all the events that are happening. So thank you all very much, and I do hope you will come and attend these fantastic, epic, historic events happening in your city of Baltimore.